serious. What are some of the creepiest declassified documents made available to the public? Memo from Roger Boyce: Julian O-ring erosion. Months prior to the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster, he essentially predicted and forewarned that the rocket O-rings would fail if the shuttle launched in cold weather. The NSA and Catalog. It contains a list of capabilities which the NSA and other national security administrations have been in possession of and use for the purpose of cyber surveillance. The document was created in 2008 and was made public in 2013. The technology in this document is incredible and terrifying for the idea of privacy. If you think they don't know everything, they do. These devices are everywhere. Could be in any cable, any computer, any phone, any anything. Operation Unthinkable. The plan for the UK and us to launch a surprise attack against the USSR at the end of WWII. UK, us, and what was left of Wehrmacht. They literally planned to use just defeated Germans to get the numbers they needed. But keep in mind that the military often has multiple plans for things that are not even remotely likely to happen. So it's more of an analysis of what would happen if we did this than an actual operation plan. The WikiLeaks documents about PRISM and about the smart device hacking methods along with how to set said devices into a false off mode. Project Pluto is pretty horrific. The proposed use for nuclear powered ramjets would be to power a cruise missile called SLAM for supersonic low altitude missile. In order to reach ramjet speed, it would be launched from the ground by a cluster of conventional rocket boosters. Once it reached cruising altitude and was far away from populated areas, the nuclear reactor would be made critical. Since nuclear power gave it almost unlimited range, the missile could cruise in circles over the ocean until ordered down to the deck for its supersonic dash to targets in the Soviet Union. The SLAM, as proposed, would carry a payload of many nuclear weapons to be dropped on multiple targets, making the cruise missile into an unmanned bomber. After delivering all its warheads, the missile could then spend weeks flying over populated areas at low altitudes, causing tremendous ground damage with its shockwave and fallout. When it finally lost enough power to fly and crash landed, the engine would have a good chance of spewing deadly radiation for months to come. How about the film Aurelian? There was this user on 4chan called UTV who frequented the sports page and made lots of posts. Just normal posts too. Nothing controversial. Anyway, he had a stalker known as the Archiver who would follow and comment every single post of UTV. After a while UTV would get sick of these comments and he'd tell him to get lost. But the Archiver would just respond to them too. Eventually he started posting his own compilations of the interactions he had with UTV all over the sports page. His final post was him confessing that the people in his life found out about his obsession and he is now being monitored. But before he goes offline he wanted to share his film Aurelian, a 92-page document of everything he had ever made to do with UTV. And he requested that it be for UTV's eyes only. Of course that didn't stop people from opening it. Inside were post compilations of UTV's posts superimposed onto 3D models, extensive poems and sonnets, a detailed description of how their life together would be, and how UTV's funeral would pan out. I'm pretty sure there were real life details about UTV in there as well. Upon release of the document, UTV's only response was, and he contacted the police and went into hiding. Operation Lack biological warfare testing done on US cities. Principally, the operation involved spraying large areas with zinc cadmium sulfide, which is very toxic. Many who were affected died of cancer and the testing was never followed up on. Most of the neighborhood's genetic makeup was effed up for no reason and no apologies were made. My mom told me one time she was living in California. They stated they were spraying to get rid of fruit flies gnats. They woke up and all the fish in their tanks were bleeding out their eyes and she also had a miscarriage a week later. That story always stuck with me and made me wonder. Anything involving Japan's Unit 731 during WWII. It was a military chemical and biological warfare division that experimented on POWs. The bit that gets me about this is that they got away with it. The US have them immunity in return for their records. There is a list somewhere on web of the last words of inmates punished by death in Texas. Goodbye, warden. Here is one I found. I want the victim's family to know that I didn't commit this crime. I didn't kill your loved one. Sharon Wilson. You're convicted an innocent man and you know it. There are some lawyers hired that is gonna prove that. And I hope you can live with it. To my family and loved ones. I love you. Thank you for supporting me. You'll stay strong. The JFK assassination documents never fully being released as they keep getting pushed back. The documents themselves are creepy in the sense of how contradicting they are. But what makes it truly creepy is the full release keeps getting pushed back. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, was subjected to grueling degrading psychological experiments while he was an underage student at Harvard. Whenever I see him brought up I like to repost this. At the start of the Cold War, Henry Murray developed a personality profiling test to crack Soviet spies with psychological warfare and select which spies are ready to be sent out into the field. As part of Project MKUltra, he began experimenting on Harvard sophomores. He set one student as the control, after he proved to be a completely predictable conformist, and named him Lawful. Long story short, the latter half of the experiment involved having the student prepare an essay on his core beliefs as a person for a friendly debate. Instead, Murray had an aggressive interrogator come in and basically tear his beliefs to pieces, mocking everything he stood for, and systematically picking apart every line in the essay to see what it took to get him to react. But he didn't. It just broke him, made him into a mess of a person and left him having to pull his whole life back together again. He graduated, but then turned in his degree only a couple years later, and moved to the woods where he lived for decades. In all that time, he kept writing his essay, and slowly, he became so sure of his beliefs, so convinced that they were right, that he thought that if the nation didn't read it, we would be irreparably lost as a society. So, he set out to make sure that everyone heard what he had to say. And sure enough, Lawful's Industrial Society and Its Future has become one of the most well-known essays written in the last century. In fact, you've probably read some of it. Although, you probably know it better as the Unabomber Manifesto. Gay bomb. It was a weapon speculated by the USA in the 90s that, when dropped, would release pheromones which would make the enemy attracted to each other. I love the idea that the enemy would just stop fighting a war and get their F on. I think there was a lot of creepy things that came out when the East German Stasi files were released after the Berlin Wall fell. All citizens were allowed to view their own files and many were shocked to find out that their own relatives were informing on them, because they had no choice, and various other things. A good movie about this is called The Lives of Others. Katharina Witt, two-time Olympic gold medalist in figure skating from East Germany, had a Stasi file on her starting from when she was 8 years old. She even got spied on by fellow teammate Ingo Steuer, who was an active informant. Steuer's Stasi past eventually got the best of him when he nearly got banned from the German national team for the 2006 Winter Olympic Games due to his activities. He was eventually allowed to still go, but was forbidden from wearing the German team colors. However, his reputation got restored in 2010, allowing him to wear the German uniform for the Winter Olympics. There's one where the CIA essentially was researching astral projection and its possible applications for espionage. Project Stargate. They also wanted to disarm enemy troops with psychic hugs. Whenever I read about some of the CIA has researched, I'm like, seriously. But then I think about it and maybe they discovered something and kept it classified but released fake findings to make sure the public never finds out. Operation Northwoods. Proposed false flag attacks against American civilians targets carried out by the CIA and blamed on Cuba in 1962. Thankfully JFK said F no and shut that sh down. Apparently, JFK even demoted the guy who proposed this on the spot. Thank God. Also, this means that this idea had to go through a long chain of command with many high-ranking people in the government agreeing to it. Operation Mockingbird. It was an operation to manipulate the media for propaganda purposes. but they ended it a long time ago. Honest. How the government made it illegal to expose the government for the illegal things they have done. When exposing a crime is treated as committing a crime. You are being ruled by criminals. Edward Snowden. Surprised I'm the first to mention this. But Nixon's planned speech in case Apollo 11 failed is maybe not serial levels of creepy but still pretty creepy. The creepiest bit is that they would have still been alive as he read it. It references calling widows to be. Talks about how Armstrong and Aldrin know, present tense, that they have no hope of rescue. And implies at the end that NASA would cut communications with the men while they were still alive. Pretty cool though regardless. There is a famous alien sighting history in a city called Varginha here in Brazil, and the city is mostly known for that particular incident in 1996. A couple of years ago, Brazil's National Archive made public documents that state UFO sightings from civilians and military that dates 25 years before the incident. It may or may not be documented but is still creepy knowing this. Back during the Cuban Missile Crisis, a US Navy ship was sending depth charges towards a hidden Soviet submarine. The men in the submarine thought war had broken out, and a vote was held whether or not they should take down the ship with a nuclear torpedo. Two captains need to approve in order for the attack to happen. Both captains had approved, but a third man, Vasily Arkhipov, was given a vote as well. He voted no on the attack. Since the vote had to be unanimous, the attack was off the table. Creepy as F when you realize how much power men have to be able to destroy the world. The Tuskegee study comes to mind. The study, which ran from 1932 to 1972 by the US Public Health Services, infected poor African Americans with syphilis to see how the disease naturally evolves. Those who took part in the study thought they were receiving free medical care. Get this. None of those who were infected were treated with penicillin despite its known effectiveness. The study stopped when a government employee blew the whistle. Even worse, those running the experiment told neighboring medical care facilities that if one of their subjects were to seek care for something, to specifically deny giving them penicillin. Project Acoustic Kitty was pretty weird and creepy if you think about how things would be if they were successful. Basically, the CIA wanted to put microphones and transmitters inside of cats and use them to spy on the Soviets in the 1960s. It cost about $20 million and was a huge failure. But the thought of my own pet being used to spy on me is pretty unsettling. Didn't they send a cat successfully but it got hit by a car? The creepiest fact is that even the most horrible declassified files are just small part of the documents that came to light. Too many facts went down the drain.